The cracks in my marriage to Claire weren't sudden, but they started small, like a hairline fracture on a windshield. At first, I told myself I was imagining things. She was busy, stressed. Maybe I wasn't pulling my weight at home. But the signs kept piling up. Claire's laughter was softer, almost practiced. Her touch, once warm and familiar, felt mechanical, like she was going through the motions. It wasn't until Paige entered the picture that everything really started to unravel. Paige had always been a wild card, loud, unapologetic, and infamous for her chaotic parties. Claire didn't even like her that much before, always calling her a bad influence. Yet, now they were suddenly thick as thieves. One evening, Claire casually announced she'd be going to a girls' night at Paige's place. She barely met my eyes when she said it, busying herself with folding laundry. "Paige's? Again?" I asked, keeping my voice even. "You've been hanging out with her a lot lately." Claire hesitated, just a fraction of a second, but I caught it. "It's not a big deal, Adam. She's just been going through a tough time, and I'm trying to be there for her." Something in her tone, defensive, dismissive, set off alarm bells. I wasn't one to pry, but the thought of Claire, my Claire, getting swept up in Paige's world of late-night antics and questionable morals didn't sit right with me. "You sure this is just about Paige?" I asked. "You've been distant lately." She stopped folding, her hands gripping a t-shirt a little too tightly. "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means I feel like I barely see you anymore. You're always out, or tired or—" "Maybe I'm tired because I'm juggling a million things," she snapped, cutting me off. "Work, the house, trying to keep this family running." "And me?" I interrupted, my voice quieter now. "Am I even part of that equation anymore?" Claire didn't answer right away. Instead, she sighed, tossed the t-shirt onto the pile, and turned to leave the room. "I'm not doing this right now, Adam." Her words lingered, heavy and unresolved, as she walked away. That night, after she left for Paige's, I sat alone in the darkened living room, phone in hand. I'd never been the jealous type, but something gnawed at me, a voice in my head whispering that things weren't adding up. My fingers hovered over a tracking app I'd installed ages ago for emergencies. I hesitated, feeling the weight of my own mistrust. But as the minutes ticked by and my mind spiraled with possibilities, I gave in. A few taps later, her location popped up on the screen. My heart sank. She wasn't anywhere near Paige's house. I'd like to say I thought it through, that I sat there weighing my options and debating whether to confront her. But the truth? I just grabbed my keys and drove. The location on my phone led me to a part of town I hadn't visited in years. The kind of place you only go if you're desperate to avoid being seen. The Westmont Inn stood at the edge of a dimly lit road, its neon sign buzzing faintly, a couple of letters flickering. It reeked of cheap secrets and bad decisions. Claire's car was there, parked in the back lot, half hidden under the shadow of a broken street lamp. My chest felt tight, my breath shallow. A voice in my head screamed that this was all some huge misunderstanding. Maybe she had a flat tire. Maybe Paige dragged her into something. But deep down, I knew better. I parked a few spots away, hands gripping the wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. My stomach churned as I stared at her car, trying to summon the courage to get out. I didn't even realize I'd left the engine running until the faint hum cut off when I yanked the keys out. Every step toward the motel felt heavier than the last. I reached the second floor, where her car was parked below, and glanced at the room numbers. My hands trembled as I approached room 212. Through the paper-thin walls, I heard muffled laughter. Her laughter. The sound sliced through me like a blade, sharp and unrelenting. I stood there for a moment, my fist raised to knock but frozen mid-air. Maybe I didn't want to know the truth. Maybe I wanted to turn around and walk away, pretend this never happened. But something inside me, anger, pride, betrayal, maybe all of it, refused to let me back down. I pounded on the door, the sound loud enough to echo down the entire hallway. The laughter inside stopped abruptly. "Who is it?" Claire's voice called, slightly panicked. "It's me, Claire." My voice was steady, but just barely. A shuffle of movement followed. The door cracked open, revealing Claire's face, flushed and startled. Her makeup was smudged, her hair disheveled. For a brief second, she looked like the woman I married, the woman I loved. But then the reality of where we were and what she'd done washed over me like ice water. "Adam," she gasped, stepping out into the hallway and closing the door slightly behind her. "What are you doing here?" "I could ask you the same thing," I said, my voice low and hard. "But I think I already know the answer." Before she could respond, the door opened wider, and a man stepped into view. He was average-looking, mid-30s maybe, wearing nothing but a pair of jeans. His presence confirmed everything I didn't want to believe. "Is this him, Claire?" I asked, my voice rising. "Is this the reason you've been so distant?" The man didn't say a word, his eyes wide as he stood there like a deer caught in headlights. Claire reached for me, her voice trembling. "Adam, I can explain." "Don't," I snapped, pulling back from her touch. "Don't you dare try to explain this." The hallway felt too small, the walls closing in as my heart pounded in my chest. The sound of her stammering excuses barely registered. I turned on my heel and stormed away, her voice chasing after me, begging me to come back to let her explain. But I didn't stop. I didn't look back. By the time I reached my car, my hands were shaking so violently that it took 3 tries to get the key in the ignition. I slammed the door shut and sat there for a moment, gripping the wheel, trying to steady my breathing. She'd betrayed me. And this wasn't over. The drive home felt like a blur, my knuckles white on the steering wheel. Every second replayed in my head, the laughter, the way Claire looked at me, and that guy standing there like some awkward bystander in my nightmare. By the time I pulled into the driveway, the anger was boiling over, but beneath it, there was something worse, the ache of betrayal. I didn't even turn on the lights when I got inside. The house was too quiet, too still. I sat on the couch, staring into the darkness, waiting. It was almost midnight when I heard her car pull up. My heart jumped, not from hope but from the sheer adrenaline of knowing the confrontation was coming. The door creaked open, and Claire stepped in, moving cautiously. She must have spotted me sitting there because she froze like she was caught red-handed again. "Adam," she started, her voice soft, almost pleading. "Don't," I said, my voice firm but low. "Don't even start with that." She set her purse down on the counter and took a hesitant step toward me. "I know what you think you saw, but—" "I think I saw you in a motel room with another man," I interrupted, standing up so quickly the chair squeaked. "And I don't need you to spin it into something it's not." Her eyes widened, her hands wringing nervously. "It's not what it looks like. He's just a friend." "A friend?" I repeated, letting out a bitter laugh. "That's what you're going with? Friends meet in seedy motels at night now." "It wasn't planned," she stammered, her words spilling out in a rush. "It just happened. I wasn't thinking, Adam. I swear it didn't mean anything." I slammed my hand on the counter, the sound echoing through the room. "Don't you dare say it didn't mean anything. You meant everything to me, Claire. And this is how you repay me." Tears welled up in her eyes, and for a moment, she looked like she might crumble. "I made a mistake," she whispered. "A mistake?" I snapped, stepping closer. "A mistake is forgetting an anniversary or leaving the lights on. Sleeping with someone else isn't a mistake. It's a choice. Your choice." She opened her mouth to respond but closed it again, looking away. That silence, that lack of denial, hit me harder than any excuse she could have given. "How long?" I asked, my voice quieter now but no less intense. "Adam, how long?" She hesitated, her bottom lip trembling. "A few months," she finally admitted, her voice barely audible. The words were a gut punch, knocking the air out of me. Months. She'd been lying to me for months, pretending everything was fine while sneaking around behind my back. "You were supposed to be my partner," I said, my voice cracking despite my efforts to stay strong. "The one person I could trust. How could you do this to us?" "To me?" Her tears spilled over, and she reached out as if to touch me, but I stepped back. "I never meant to hurt you," she choked out. "Well, congratulations," I said, the sarcasm dripping from my voice. "You managed to destroy everything anyway." I turned away, heading for the stairs. "Adam, wait," she cried, following me. I stopped halfway up and turned to face her. "I'm done waiting, Claire. You made your choices, and now you'll have to live with them. But don't think for a second this is over. You broke us, and I'm going to make damn sure you feel every ounce of the pain you've caused. The look on her face was a mix of fear and regret, but I didn't stay to watch it linger. I climbed the rest of the stairs, leaving her standing there alone in the wreckage of the life she'd shattered. The next morning hit like a bad hangover, except this wasn't something I could sleep off. The bed was cold and empty beside me, a bitter reminder that Claire hadn't even tried to follow me upstairs. Good. I didn't want her near me. I spent most of the day pacing the house, the betrayal simmering just below the surface. Anger and heartbreak were battling it out, but beneath it all, a cold, calculating thought began to take shape. Claire wasn't going to walk away from this without consequences. I started small, just testing the waters. I went through her phone records while she was in the shower, snapping pictures of any unfamiliar numbers. A quick reverse search gave me his name, Josh Bennett. Nothing special about him, just some guy from her office. Knowing his name made it all feel more real, like the betrayal wasn't just an abstract concept anymore. She didn't even notice her phone sitting slightly out of place when she got out of the shower. I was already downstairs, nursing a cup of coffee like nothing had happened. Adam, she started, her voice tentative. I didn't look up. What? She hesitated, and I could feel her searching for the right words. I just want to talk. About last night. I set the mug down, the sound sharp against the table. There's nothing to talk about, Claire. You said enough last night. And honestly, so did I. Her shoulders slumped, and she shuffled out of the room. Good. Let her stew in her guilt. The rest of the week, I kept things civil on the surface, just enough to make her think I was starting to let it go. But every moment I wasn't working, I was digging. Social media profiles, emails, work schedules. I built a web of her lies, tracing every moment she'd spent with him. It didn't take long to find what I needed. Pictures from work functions, tagged posts from mutual friends, even an old message thread where she told a friend she needed spaced from me. It was all there, a trail of breadcrumbs leading straight to her affair. The more I uncovered, the angrier I got. Not just at her but at myself for not seeing it sooner, for believing her lies. But the anger wasn't aimless anymore. It was focused, sharp. This wasn't going to be some petty shouting match. No, I was going to make sure that when I struck, it would leave a mark. Claire wasn't just going to lose me, she was going to lose everything. By the end of the week, I had a plan. It wasn't enough to just catch her and Josh in the act. No, that was just step one. The real goal was to dismantle her world piece by piece. I created a folder, Operation Truth, I called it. It held screenshots, emails, voice memos, and everything I could use to lay bare the reality of her betrayal. I wasn't just preparing for a confrontation. I was preparing for war. And when the time came, she'd realize just how much damage her mistake had caused. The next phase of my plan was all about patience. Every move had to be precise like chess. Claire was still walking on eggshells, sensing the distance I kept between us. She tried cooking my favorite meals, asking about my day, even sitting next to me on the couch at night. I let her. Because what she didn't know was that I wasn't looking for her apology. I was setting her up. It started with Josh. The man she risked our marriage for wasn't even worth the effort, but I needed to make him part of the plan. Using an anonymous email account, I sent him a message pretending to be a client from his work, offering a lucrative opportunity. Something big enough to pique his interest but vague enough to keep him guessing. The hook was baited with everything he'd want. Promises of high pay, the potential for growth, and the prestige of meeting select industry professionals at an exclusive retreat. The kicker? The invite mentioned Claire's name, suggesting she'd recommended him as a good fit. I knew him well enough by now. Guys like Josh couldn't resist their ego being stroked. Within hours, he responded, expressing interest and asking for details. The next few days were a whirlwind of crafting this elaborate fake opportunity. I created a polished website for a non-existent consulting firm, filled it with glowing testimonials, and even threw in a few LinkedIn profiles to make it look legitimate. I even forged a schedule for a weekend retreat at a private cabin, promising networking events and team-building activities. Josh didn't question any of it. Convincing Claire to join was just as easy. That's the thing about guilt. It makes people desperate to fix things, to prove they're still good. So when I casually mentioned that I'd seen this great opportunity pop up for someone at her office and suggested she tell Josh about it, her face lit up. "That's a great idea," she said, as if she was relieved I wasn't holding a grudge anymore. "Yeah, maybe you two can work on it together," I added, barely concealing my sarcasm. "You always said he was ambitious." She smiled nervously, nodding like this could be her way of making things right. By the end of the week, everything was in place. Josh had RSVP'd, Claire had blocked off the weekend, and the fake retreat was set. The cabin I chose was a little out of the way, far enough to feel isolated but still accessible. It had been easy to book under a pseudonym. I paid extra for privacy, ensuring no one else would be around. When the day came, I told Claire I had a work trip of my own. She barely glanced at me as she packed, her expression carefully neutral. "I hope this weekend goes well for you," I said, watching her zip up her bag. "Thanks, Adam," she replied softly. Maybe when I get back, we can talk?" I just nodded, letting her think there was a sliver of hope. As she drove off to meet Josh at the retreat, I was already on my way to the cabin. I'd be waiting when they arrived. The cabin stood at the end of a winding dirt road, surrounded by dense trees that swallowed up the weak autumn sunlight. It was quiet, save for the occasional rustling of leaves in the wind. Perfect. I parked my car out of sight, just beyond a thicket, and walked up to the cabin. Inside, I set everything up. A single table at the center of the room, 2 chairs on one side, and one on the other. I arranged the evidence. My Operation Truth folder, Claire's messages, and Josh's pitiful replies, on the table, fanning them out like cards in a losing hand. By the time I was done, the scene was set. All that was left to do was wait. They arrived separately, just as I expected. Claire showed up first, pulling her car into the gravel driveway. She stepped out, looking slightly uneasy, her bag slung over one shoulder. She didn't see me until I stepped out of the shadows. Her gasp echoed in the stillness as her eyes went wide. "Adam," she stammered, clutching her bag like it might shield her. "What are you?" "Go inside," I said, my voice calm but cold. "Adam, Inside," I repeated, cutting her off. She hesitated for a moment before walking past me, her head down. I followed her, closing the door behind us. Not 5 minutes later, Josh's car rolled up. He stepped out, looking like he'd just won the lottery. I almost laughed at how smug he looked, striding toward the cabin like he owned the place. But the moment he opened the door and saw me, the confidence drained from his face. "Oh hey," he said awkwardly, trying to play it cool. "Come in, Josh," I said, gesturing to the table. "We've got a lot to talk about." Claire sat stiffly in one of the chairs, her hands folded in her lap. Josh glanced at her, then back at me, his brow furrowed. "What's going on?" "You'll see," I said, motioning for him to sit. Once he did, I took my place across from them. For a moment, the only sound was the creak of the wooden chairs as they shifted uncomfortably. "Do you know what this is?" I asked, sliding a photo across the table. It was a picture of Claire's car parked outside the Westmont Inn. Josh's face paled, and Claire's breath hitched. "Adam, please," Claire began, but I held up a hand to silence her. "I'm talking," I said, my tone leaving no room for argument. I laid out the evidence one by one, screenshots of their messages, the timeline of their lies, and even the receipt from the motel. With each piece, their excuses crumbled further, the weight of their betrayal sinking in. Claire started crying, her hands trembling as she reached for me. "I'm sorry, Adam. I'm so sorry. I never wanted to hurt you." I leaned back in my chair, staring at her. "You didn't just hurt me, Claire. You destroyed everything we built together. And for what?" "Him." I jabbed a finger toward Josh, who sat there like a scolded child. Josh finally spoke, his voice shaky. "Look man, this was a mistake. I didn't mean for—" "Stop," I snapped, cutting him off. "You meant every word, every action. Don't insult me by pretending otherwise." He shut his mouth, his eyes darting to Claire like he expected her to defend him. "I didn't bring you here for apologies," I said, my voice like ice. "I brought you here to show you that I know everything, and to let you know that from this point forward, you don't control how this ends." "I do." Their silence was deafening. I leaned forward, my voice low and deliberate. By the time I'm done, you'll both understand what it feels like to lose everything. And you'll know exactly who put you there. The color drained from their faces as the weight of my words sank in. The room was silent except for Claire's stifled sobs and Josh's shallow breathing. I stood, moving deliberately, the floor creaking under my boots. With their attention locked on me, I reached into my bag and pulled out 2 envelopes, setting them on the table. "This," I said, tapping the envelopes, "is where we decide how far this goes." Josh frowned, his confusion breaking through his fear. "What does that mean?" "It means," I said, staring him down, "you're going to play a little game. Each envelope contains a consequence. One of you rolls higher on the dice, and you get to pick which envelope you open." Claire's face twisted in disbelief. "Adam, this is insane. We don't have to do this. We can." "Sit," I snapped, slamming my palm on the table. She flinched but obeyed. From my pocket, I pulled out a pair of dice and set them in the middle of the table. Simple rules. High roll picks. If you refuse to play, I open both envelopes, and trust me, you don't want that. Josh opened his mouth to protest but thought better of it. His hand trembled as he reached for one die. Claire hesitated, her tear-streaked face frozen in terror. "Go ahead," I urged her, voice calm but firm. "This is your chance to control what happens next. Roll." With trembling fingers, she picked up the other die and glanced at Josh before rolling. It clattered onto the table. A 3. Josh swallowed hard, rolling his die with shaking hands. It bounced across the table before settling on a 5. His relief was visible, but short-lived. I slid the envelopes toward him. "Your pick." He hesitated, looking between them like either choice might explode. Slowly, he reached for the one on the left. "Open it," I said, leaning back in my chair. He tore it open and pulled out the folded paper inside. As he read, the blood drained from his face. "You'll be receiving a series of anonymous tips," I said, watching his reaction. "Your employer, your family, and your social circle will all learn the truth about what you've been doing. Every message, every photo, it's all going public." Josh's hands began to shake, the paper falling from his grip. "You can't." "Oh, I can," I said, cutting him off. "And I will. But don't worry, it's nothing compared to what's in the other envelope." Claire's eyes widened, and for a moment, she looked ready to lunge for it. "Go ahead," I said, smirking. "Open it if you're curious." She froze, her hands clenching into fists on her lap. I leaned forward, my voice dropping to a near whisper. "That one's yours, Claire. Your job, your reputation, your family. Everything you've been holding on to while playing your little games? Gone. Evidence will go to your boss, your parents, and even the neighbors. They'll all see who you really are." Her lip trembled, her tears spilling freely now. "Adam, please, you don't have to do this." "I didn't have to, Claire," I said, my voice icy. "But you gave me no choice." The weight of my words hung in the air as I stood and grabbed my bag. "This is just the start. By the time I'm done, you'll both wish you'd never met each other." I paused at the door, glancing back at their stunned faces. "Enjoy the retreat." And with that, I walked out, leaving them to sit in the wreckage of their own making. Driving away from the cabin, I felt the tension in my chest ease slightly, though the anger still simmered beneath the surface. I didn't feel triumphant, but I felt in control for the first time since Claire's betrayal. This wasn't about forgiveness or even closure. It was about making them face the consequences they'd tried to dodge. But I wasn't done yet. The dice game at the cabin was just phase 1, a psychological reminder that their fate was no longer in their hands. I needed to drive the message home, especially for Claire. She wasn't just going to walk away from this thinking she could rebuild her life with Josh or anyone else without repercussions. Back home, I prepared the next step of my plan, the delivery of truth. Over the next 2 days, I compiled every piece of evidence I'd collected into neat little packages. Claire's employer got a professional-looking envelope with printed copies of her messages, screenshots of her lies, and a note explaining the ethical implications of employing someone who could be so duplicitous. Her parents' package was more personal. Photos of Claire's car outside the motel, emails that highlighted her deceit, and a letter from me. I didn't sugarcoat my words. I told them exactly what she'd done and how it had destroyed our marriage. Then there were our neighbors. For them, I prepared a dossier. Less detailed but still damning. Enough to expose the perfect image Claire had cultivated. Josh wasn't off the hook either. His employer and family received their own copies. The nature of his betrayal, his involvement with a married woman, it was all laid bare. I made sure it would hit him where it hurt. His career and his standing with those closest to him. The final piece of the puzzle was a group text I sent to a carefully curated list of mutual friends. It was a simple message, accompanied by a handful of the juiciest screenshots. To everyone who thought Claire and Josh were just friends, here's the truth. I trusted them both, and this is how they repaid me. Thought you all deserved to know. The fallout was immediate. Claire's phone started blowing up within an hour. She called me once, then twice, then a third time before finally leaving a voicemail. Her voice was shaky, frantic. Adam, what have you done? Please, we can talk about this. I'll fix it. I swear I'll fix it. I deleted the voicemail without listening to the rest. Josh's response was more predictable. He tried to call me too, but I ignored him. Not long after, I got a series of angry texts. You're insane, man. You don't have to ruin my life over this. I'll stay away from Claire, okay? Just back off. I didn't reply. That evening, Claire showed up at the house. She stood on the porch, her face pale, her hair disheveled like she'd been crying for hours. When I opened the door, she didn't try to come in. She knew better. Why are you doing this, Adam? She pleaded, her voice breaking. You're not like this. You're better than this. I leaned against the doorframe, crossing my arms. I wasn't like this, I said, my tone calm but cutting. But you made me this way. Tears streamed down her face as she shook her head. You don't understand. I didn't mean. Stop, I interrupted, holding up a hand. Don't insult me with your excuses. You made your choices, Claire. Now you're just living with them. She stepped closer, her hands clasped in front of her like a prayer. Adam, I'll do anything, anything to fix this. Just tell me what you want. I stared at her for a long moment, the woman I'd once loved reduced to a sobbing, desperate mess. What I want, I said finally, my voice low and steady, is for you to feel what I felt. To know that trust, once broken, can never be put back together. I closed the door in her face, her muffled cries fading as I walked away. The game of truth was over, and she had lost. The next morning, I felt something I hadn't experienced in weeks. Clarity. The anger was still there, but it wasn't chaotic anymore. It was focused, steady, and relentless. I was about to deliver the final blow, the one that would seal Claire and Josh's fate for good. By mid-afternoon, the fallout was spreading like wildfire. Claire's job had been placed under review due to the ethical concerns I'd highlighted. Her parents had called multiple times, leaving me tearful voicemails begging me to reconsider the public exposure. Josh, on the other hand, wasn't faring any better. Word about his affair had reached his employer, and from what I heard through a mutual acquaintance, his contract was on the verge of being terminated. His fiancée, yes, the guy had been engaged, had reportedly thrown his things out onto their front lawn. But this wasn't enough. Not yet. I spent the day preparing the final stage of my plan. It was a digital time bomb, an email I scheduled to send to everyone in our social and professional circles at exactly 6 p.m. Attached were files containing all the damning evidence. There was no running from it, no hiding, no twisting the narrative to make themselves look like victims. By 5:45 p.m., my phone started buzzing. Claire must have caught wind of what was about to happen because her car screeched into the driveway minutes later. She didn't bother knocking this time. She pounded on the door, her voice frantic. Adam, open the door. Please, I need to talk to you. I took my time walking over, letting her desperation hang in the air. When I opened it, her face was streaked with tears, her makeup smeared. She looked like someone barely holding it together. Adam, you can't send that email, she begged, her voice breaking. Please, I'll do anything, anything you want. Just don't do this. Her words didn't move me. In fact, they only fueled my resolve. You think this is about wanting something from you? I asked, my voice cold. This is about showing you that actions have consequences. You played with fire, Claire. Now you're getting burned. She reached out, grabbing my arm, her grip weak but desperate. I know I messed up. I know I broke your trust. But please, Adam, don't ruin me. You loved me once. Doesn't that mean anything? I stared at her, unmoved. It meant everything, Claire. And that's exactly why this has to happen. You took what we had and destroyed it. Now, I'm just making sure you remember that. Her knees buckled, and she collapsed onto the porch, sobbing uncontrollably. For a brief moment, I felt a pang of something, pity maybe, but it was drowned out by the memory of her laughter behind that motel door. At exactly 6 p.m., my phone vibrated, signaling that the email had been sent. It was done. Claire's phone buzzed almost immediately, and she fumbled to check it, her face crumpling further as she realized what had happened. "You're a monster," she choked out, her voice shaking. "No, Claire," I said, stepping back inside. "I'm just the man you created." I closed the door, leaving her sobbing on the porch. The rest of the night passed quietly. I poured myself a drink, sat in the living room, and watched the messages flood my inbox. Some from friends expressing their shock, others from people who clearly didn't know what to say. By the time I went to bed, I didn't feel triumphant or vindicated. What I felt was simple: peace. The next morning, I felt something I hadn't experienced in weeks: clarity. The anger was still there, but it wasn't chaotic anymore. It was focused, steady, and relentless. I was about to deliver the final blow, the one that would seal Claire and Josh's fate for good. By mid-afternoon, the fallout was spreading like wildfire. Claire's job had been placed under review due to the ethical concerns I'd highlighted. Her parents had called multiple times, leaving me tearful voicemails begging me to reconsider the public exposure. Josh, on the other hand, wasn't faring any better. Word about his affair had reached his employer, and from what I heard through a mutual acquaintance, his contract was on the verge of being terminated. His fiancée, yes, the guy had been engaged, had reportedly thrown his things out onto their front lawn. But this wasn't enough. Not yet. I spent the day preparing the final stage of my plan. It was a digital time bomb, an email I scheduled to send to everyone in our social and professional circles at exactly 6 p.m. Attached were files containing all the damning evidence. There was no running from it, no hiding, no twisting the narrative to make themselves look like victims. By 5:45 p.m., my phone started buzzing. Claire must have caught wind of what was about to happen because her car screeched into the driveway minutes later. She didn't bother knocking this time. She pounded on the door, her voice frantic. "Adam, open the door. Please, I need to talk to you." I took my time walking over, letting her desperation hang in the air. When I opened it, her face was streaked with tears, her makeup smeared. She looked like someone barely holding it together. "Adam, you can't send that email," she begged, her voice breaking. "Please, I'll do anything, anything you want. Just don't do this." Her words didn't move me. In fact, they only fueled my resolve. "You think this is about wanting something from you?" I asked, my voice cold. "This is about showing you that actions have consequences. You played with fire, Claire. Now you're getting burned." She reached out, grabbing my arm, her grip weak but desperate. "I know I messed up. I know I broke your trust. But please, Adam, don't ruin me. You loved me once. Doesn't that mean anything?" I stared at her, unmoved. "It meant everything, Claire. And that's exactly why this has to happen. You took what we had and destroyed it. Now, I'm just making sure you remember that." Her knees buckled, and she collapsed onto the porch, sobbing uncontrollably. For a brief moment, I felt a pang of something, pity maybe, but it was drowned out by the memory of her laughter behind that motel door. At exactly 6 p.m., my phone vibrated, signaling that the email had been sent. It was done. Claire's phone buzzed almost immediately, and she fumbled to check it, her face crumpling further as she realized what had happened. "You're a monster," she choked out, her voice shaking. "No, Claire," I said, stepping back inside. "I'm just the man you created." I closed the door, leaving her sobbing on the porch. The rest of the night passed quietly. I poured myself a drink, sat in the living room, and watched the messages flood my inbox. Some from friends expressing their shock, others from people who clearly didn't know what to say. By the time I went to bed, I didn't feel triumphant or vindicated. What I felt was simple: peace. A few weeks passed, and the dust had mostly settled. Claire had moved out of the house. Her parents came by to collect her things while she stayed out of sight. I didn't mind. It was easier that way. Josh, on the other hand, had been thoroughly humiliated. Word got around, and his professional life was in shambles. He'd been fired, and his ex-fiancée had plastered his infidelity all over social media for good measure. Last I heard, he was crashing at a friend's place, trying to figure out what to do next. As for me, I was learning how to breathe again. I spent more time outdoors, rediscovering hobbies I'd let slip during my marriage. Hiking, biking, even just sitting in the park and watching the world go by. I didn't realize how much of myself I'd buried under the weight of keeping our marriage afloat. One afternoon, while walking through town, I bumped into an old friend, someone I hadn't seen since college. His name was Matt, and we'd lost touch over the years. He invited me out for coffee, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I said yes. Over coffee, I opened up about everything that had happened. Matt listened without judgment, nodding and offering the occasional word of encouragement. "You've been through hell," he said finally, shaking his head. "But you're still standing. That's something." "Barely," I admitted, stirring my coffee absent-mindedly. He grinned. "Barely is still standing, man. Give yourself credit. You're out here, rebuilding. That's what matters." His words stuck with me. Rebuilding. That's exactly what I was doing. Piece by piece, day by day. I started therapy, a suggestion from another friend, and it helped more than I expected. Talking through the betrayal, the anger, the grief, and even my own mistakes was like pulling thorns out one by one. Painful, but necessary. One evening, while sorting through some old boxes, I found a photo of Claire and me from our wedding day. We looked so happy, so hopeful. I stared at it for a long time before placing it in the trash. That chapter of my life was over. Eventually, I sold the house. It was too full of memories, too tied to the life I was leaving behind. I used the money to move to a smaller place on the other side of town. It wasn't much, but it was mine. I didn't rush into dating or try to fill the void with someone new. Instead, I focused on myself, on becoming the version of me I'd let slip away. And you know what? It felt good. I still think about Claire sometimes, but not with anger or longing. Just a quiet, distant sadness for what could have been. I know I'll carry the scars of her betrayal, but scars mean you've healed. One day, I'll meet someone new. Someone who values honesty and loyalty as much as I do. But for now, I'm okay being on my own, finding my footing, and rediscovering who I am. Because this isn't the end of my story. It's just the beginning of a new one.